Hey, girl.
Girl, your friend is here.
Look, I'm so thrilled that you got to hang out with Damien for a little bit.
Oh my, I was like starstruck when we did this over Zoom, you guys. We did this interview with Damien Echols over Zoom. Where is he now? They just moved to New Orleans?
Yeah, so they were in New Orleans. It looks like beautiful and cool, even in the little Zoom. So I'm glad that you got to interact with him a little bit. I've been talking about him and like gushing over him for so long, so it's nice for you to like experience the warmth.
Totally. Well, also like he's got this big bushy beard like that's really like down to his chest. And like
really
he
long.
doesn't look like what I remember him to look like at all, you know?
Yeah, no, he looks nothing like when he did in that we see of him in West of Memphis. And he's finding his look, and I'm here for that. That's all I'm gonna say.
Damien, let me know how you did that, girl. I'm still on my journey. I am still very much on my journey.
He can wear it all. He always looks great. He always looks cool. Just jealous. You know, what are you going to do? He wins again.
So here you go, you guys. Here's our interview with Damien Echols. He was just lovely. It was so fun to get to see the two of you bicker and be, adorable with each other. And, it was a very fun way to spend an hour.
Wasn't it good? I'm glad. And if you haven't already, please listen to our 2-part episode of West of Memphis.
Yeah. And we'll say a quick goodbye at the end.
Yes.
All right, here we go.
There you are. I got it.
Hey, big brother. How's it going?
All things considered, pretty good.
So Patrick and Damien, you have never met. Now you are.
We have
Patrick,
not.
Damien, Patrick.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
You too. And thank you for doing a show on this, for helping us get the word about this out there.
Oh, we're so excited. Your beard is gorgeous.
Thank you. It feels horrendous in this humidity.
I can't get any longer than this, or like when I try to go to sleep on it, it just feels like I'm sleeping on like crushed up saltine crackers.
I forgot that like one of the things about growing up in the South is there's no such thing as a good hair day. Especially when you're this far south, like in New Orleans, every single day there's so much humidity in the air. It feels like even a beard, it feels like you've got a clown wig on your face.
Oh, and you guys are in New Orleans now, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I have a million questions. I've been following your journey since I was, my God, like a teenager, I feel like. So it's really an incredible thing for me to get to actually talk to you.
Thank you. And, that's one of the things I always tell people. Like, I hear that from people all the time that'll say, people of like the generation that came after mine, and they'll say, I grew up knowing about the documentaries and knowing about your case. And the thing that I always say to them, and it really is 100% true, is if it wasn't for those people, people paying attention to it, people for, following it, the state would have murdered me and swept this under the rug. So it really is people paying attention and caring about this that saved my life.
I mean, that is such I know that is true. It's just it's one of those things that I feel like, well, I know that, but I don't want you to know that. It's better for us if you don't know that.
And we've been screaming about this forever, and everyone always wants to know how you and I became friends. So I tell my version of it, which is that I went to your art show in January of one year. Mike was away. I went up to Lori and started talking at her about how much I love December because of my birthday and then our anniversary. And then I knew it was your birthday and your anniversary. And my story is, and I'm convinced it's the truth, is that she grabbed my hand and said, you have to meet Damien, and took me back into the green room. And then I think the listeners want to hear like what your version of that is.
Okay. This will sound insane, but the very first memory that I have of you, is seeing you sitting across from me at the table at Emilio's, that Italian restaurant down in Soho.
Yeah. Because we went to dinner that night.
That's the first memory I have. I remember you sitting at the table, but keep in mind that like whenever I got out, I've actually been doing work with a doctor who is studying like what long-term solitary confinement does to the human brain. And one of the things we didn't realize until after I'd gotten out was I had like severe brain trauma. Like I lacked facial recognition, voice recognition. Even the fact that I remember like the night that we met is saying something, because normally at that time period, I would meet the same people 2 or 3 times. Even if I went to dinner with them the night before, I would still be reintroducing myself to them the next day because I just could not retain any information.
So you're saying I should feel lucky that you even remember who I am to this day?
Yeah, because usually I always tell people, usually if I remember you the first time we met, it's a bad sign.
Oh, great.
Damien, I'm curious, and before we get too far into this, I want to know if like anything is off limits. I don't want to ask you anything inappropriate or in any way re-traumatize you in any way.
No, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, most of that stuff now, to be honest, it doesn't really bother me anymore. That wasn't always the case. Whenever I first got out, for a while, it felt like, I was doing interviews nonstop. I lived on the road for 2 straight years, traveling pretty much around the world doing speaking engagements. And I started to feel like the only thing I'm ever talking about is this case. So why did I even get out if it's still going to consume my whole life? So, but what happened is as time went on, it's kind of like everything else. It gets harder and harder to remember, because of the memory thing. So in a way, that's almost like a blessing in disguise. But when I try to think about stuff like that now, for the most part, it seems like it was literally a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else. And it's, I don't focus on it all the time, and it doesn't really bother me if anybody asks about it anymore. It just faded with time.
One of my big questions is about solitary confinement. I think those of us who have not experienced it only have like a movie version of what it is. Mm-hmm. Do you mind talking a little bit about like what that actually is and how much time you spent in that?
Well, I think it depends from place to place, like from prison to prison. It can depend on a lot of different things. Like, for example, I was in a super maximum security unit prison, which there's only like a very small handful of these that even exist in the United States. They're like the most secure of the secure, where you come in contact with almost no one. The only people that I was allowed to have a visitor once a week for 3 hours a week, and it had to be an immediate family member, no one else. But I was only given that luxury because I was on death row. Like if you weren't on death row, you didn't even have that a lot of times. You had people in there who hadn't, seen anyone but another prison guard for years. So I was fortunate in that. But you are in a cell 24 hours a day. They say that you're allowed 1 hour a day out for recreation time. But what that entails is they take you out of one cell and put you in another cell. It's not like you're with anybody else or playing basketball or anything like that. You're still in just another cell.
Outside or still inside?
Both. If it's like, even if it's outside, it's not really outside. It's in sort of like if you grow up in the South or in farmland and you know what a grain silo is, it was kind of like a grain silo, just concrete walls and a metal roof above it. So, that's miserable in the summertime anyway. Like the day I left Arkansas, it was like 114 and had not been below 100 in 30 days straight. So, that's not very pleasant to begin with. So you have, a lot of people say, why would I go out there? Why not just stay in here in this cell? So your shower is in your cell. Like there's a drain in the middle of the floor. There's a spigot on the wall. That's your shower. You never leave for that. Whenever they feed you or whenever they give you your mail, there's a little slot in a solid steel door that they open, push stuff through, and then close it again.
And do you have light in there?
You do. You have a light. And this is one of the things they'll use to torture people with, actually. They'll use it for like sleep deprivation, stuff like that, is they have this like brilliant fluorescent light, like something that would light up an entire office space secured into the wall. And they flip it off and on whenever they want to. So they'll, use it, wait till people are asleep and flip it to wake them up or whatever it is. But it's technically supposed to be turned off for like 4 hours a day, but they make up the rules as they go along.
And how much time did you spend in that environment?
A little over 8 years. I was locked up for 18. So a little bit over, almost was working on the 9th year whenever I walked out. So I'd been in there for the major part of a decade, the day that I walked out and into the streets of Manhattan, which was part of what caused the psychological overload just all the sensory input all of a sudden and have to figure out. And keep in mind at this point, it's not just that for me. It's that I haven't even seen a computer since 1986. So I'm not used to like even ATM machines. To me, ATM machines were kind of like alien technology. The first time I had to think about how to use one of those, it was petrifying. So there was all that kind of stuff added on top of it too, trying to figure out how to use a cell phone or a computer or, just navigate, even if it's just through taxi. If you've spent the major part of your life sealed inside a box, then even figuring stuff like that out is incredibly overwhelming.
I remember being in Salem and you would like practice paying with a credit card. Like it's things like that people really don't think about when they hear about how great these stories are, which they are. But it's like there's also a major adjustment that
and
happens.
You don't understand the rules of the world. So and you're also almost starving to death on a soul level for any kind of sensory interaction or input. So I found myself doing things constantly just because I could. Like every time I passed by a Coke machine, I had to get something out of it.
Wow.
Not because I was thirsty or not because I wanted one, but just the fact that I can use a Coke machine. I can have this just because I want it. So I started ordering things like I had never seen Amazon before or any of that sort of stuff. So I started ordering stuff from Amazon like every single day just because so it would come, like I would get packages. I didn't realize the whole shipping thing. This was before Prime. I didn't realize that I was, accumulating debt yet.
Lori's like, why are there 100 charges for $4.99 on the credit card over and over again?
Oh, and it was like the most horrible stuff. Like every single day, a new Danzig CD would appear in the mail or something, or fans. I was obsessed with fans whenever I first got out, just because the white noise like did something to my nervous system, soothed it in some way. So I had to have big fans in every room.
Oh my God. Before we go back, will you tell us like what is happening right now?
We filed, and I can't remember the exact date. I am horrible about this just because we're in the process of moving,
July 19th.
July 19th, we filed a motion with the courts. I mean, it's kind of hard to even know where to start just because this goes back for at least a year now, almost maybe even 2 years. I'm not even 100% positive when we started this process, but we started asking the state, could we run a new kind of DNA testing that they didn't have even at the time that we got out of prison. They found there's a new kind of testing that they can use now where they said they could even get DNA from like the knots in the ligatures. They said if you untie that knot, the skin cells of the person who tied that knot will be inside the ligature.
Wow.
And they can even test those now. So there would be nobody's DNA there except the person who tied that knot. So we started pushing at least a year ago, maybe almost 2 years ago, to have this testing done. We started asking the state, can we have this done? And they said, yeah, sure, we're not going to contest that. And we would wait for the evidence to arrive at the lab, and it never would. So then we would go back to the prosecutor, and it was like they kept like punting the ball to each other. Like he would say, well, the crime lab must have it. I don't know. You're going to have to get in touch with them. So we would get in touch with the crime lab, and then they would say, no, we don't have it. The police department picked it back up and took it somewhere. You're going to have to get in touch with them. So we would end up getting it. I mean, they gave us the runaround nonstop while telling us, yeah, sure, you can do the testing. But we had this nonstop runaround going on for at least a year solid. Finally, it reached a point where we FOI'd the police department saying, we want to know what evidence you actually have, where it's at, the chain of custody, all this sort of thing. And it's a federal law that they have to answer that. They have to respond to it. They never did even respond to it. So we found out later, they're already breaking federal laws with that. We find out later that the prosecutor did an interview with a local reporter like a couple of weeks before we filed the FOI, and that the prosecutor said to the reporter that he was planning on asking for a court order to destroy the evidence anyway.
And this is the evidence that, air quotes, that they hold that they say can prove your guilt.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So we know that. We know that the police department started saying that one of their excuses is, well, we believe that the evidence may have been destroyed in a fire that happened, several years ago. So Mara Leverett, who's a reporter in Arkansas, she wrote Boys on the Tracks and Devil's Knot, about our case.
Oh yeah. She's in the documentary.
Yes. She FOI'd the fire department. I don't know if it was the city fire department or the county fire department, one or the other. She FOI'd them to get a list of all the fires that had taken places in city buildings within the past decade. They responded and says there has only been one. It was inside a building that housed chlorine tanks. The fire was extinguished by an employee with a fire extinguisher before we ever even got there, and there was no damage reported. So we know that they're lying about that.
We have this thing that we say on True Crime Obsessed, which is like, let the women do the work. Like, what a smart woman to like think like, let's find out if there were any fires.
Yes.
I would never have thought of that.
Me either. But I guess that's why they say that, what is it? He who acts as his own attorney has a fool for a client. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing to me that they haven't realized, whether it's lost or destroyed or whatever, that they don't realize that if the evidence is destroyed, then it's in breach of the Alford plea. And
exactly.
It's like they're not thinking too far ahead. And I know, Damien, you always say like, well, that's because, I'm using logic and they're not. And so, but it's baffling to me that on such a grand scale with so many eyes on them, they still are not thinking, what, they think we're not going to notice?
Well, you have to keep in mind, this has kind of been their strategy from day one of this case. Like every time new evidence would come up, every time new witnesses would come up, every time somebody would recant their testimony and say that the police had forced them to lie. Anytime any of these things would pop up in the news, they would just basically tuck their head down like a turtle and hope that, something else will happen that will get people's attention onto the next thing in the news. This will be forgotten about and, eventually it'll blow over and we won't have to do anything about it. That's been their strategy from day one. And most of the time, it works for them. There's so much stuff out there to grab people's attentions that most of the time they're eventually going to lose interest and go on to the next, news cycle or whatever it is. For some reason, we were incredibly fortunate in that this case has maintained people's attention. And what I've been saying now is asking people, please don't stop paying attention. I know there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world that's kind of vying for your energy, but just like it was your attention that saved our lives when I was in there, it's also your attention that will cause this case to finally be unraveled. It's like in sports, wherever they're, sports teams will say when they play at home, they have an extra person on the field. It's the people paying attention to this case that are our extra man on the field. So just stick with us, keep the pressure on them. We're asking people to write to the state. Jillian's been putting out the addresses on social media. And right now, that's all we can do is just keep applying pressure and not moving on to the next thing.
Because the point is, if they don't have the evidence that, quote, proves your guilt, then the Alford plea is vacated. Is that right?
That was one of, well, it's kind of, here's the thing about the law is for every law on the book, there is almost always two other laws that contradict it. This is why attorneys, whenever attorneys go to law school, so many of them get their earlier degrees or get their minors in philosophy, because a lot of the stuff comes down to who argues the better point.
Yeah.
So really, especially in Arkansas, there has been no precedent for a case like this ever. So it's like we are really in uncharted waters, and it's going to come down to who has the best argument, because they're going to do like they always do and argue no harm, no foul. They took this deal, whatever. But they did agree. Whenever we took this deal, they agreed that they would work with us to keep this case going. If we came up with DNA evidence, they would do the testing on it. And we're even offering to pay for it. We're not asking the state to pay for anything.
Right.
They agreed to that. They agreed to testing. They agreed to talk to new witnesses. They agreed to look at anything we brought forward to them. And not only have they been in flagrant disregard of that, but they're also now like admitting openly to destroying evidence.
Yeah.
I think that that's not a thing that people know. That's not a thing that I knew. My guess was that when you guys accepted the Alford plea, the state still looked at you three as guilty.
Yes.
And to me, I say this in our coverage, that this all feels like it comes down to money for me. It feels to me like the big fear on the part of the state is that you guys will be able to sue them for the millions and millions of dollars that you were rightfully entitled to. And so it's surprising for me to hear you say that they were open to you guys bringing them new evidence, that they were open to saying, we're going to say that you're guilty, but we're going to act as though maybe you aren't. That's surprising to me.
Well, they said it and then never did it. So they'd say yeah, sure. And then, they'd be handed this evidence and all this research with that Lord of the Rings money on a silver platter and then not do anything with it. So they just say whatever it takes for this'll appease them for a little bit. And hopefully by the time anyone gets no one will care anymore. They just yes, everybody.
Yep. I think they actually thought that, once again, it's do the smallest amount that you have to possibly do and then give it some time and this will blow over and people will forget about it and it'll go away. That is, 100% the same mind frame that they've had since the very beginning. They thought once that deal was over, this problem was going to go away and they wouldn't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah,
because I think the thing, one of the calls to action here is if we keep the pressure on and we keep writing and we keep, publicly saying that we want to see this evidence, then the idea is that if it proves that what we all know, which is that you guys are innocent, that then not only would you get what you're entitled to, but then maybe we could find the actual killer.
Exactly right. Because like I said, they're wanting to do DNA testing on parts of the crime scene that there is no way that anyone's DNA is going to be there except for the person who participated. So this is the biggest opportunity that we have ever been given to actually solve this case. But they're not interested in solving this case.
Right, of course.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the judge who accepted the Alford plea? Because his name is Judge Lacer, and he is the guy who's reading this motion, right? It's being submitted to him. And when we covered it in I hadn't watched West of Memphis since we were going to screenings about it, me and you and Mike and Lori, and you guys would do talks after. So I hadn't seen it in a long time. And there was a lot. It's I really realized how much Eddie Vedder and I have in common. But one of the things that we have in common is that he said in this very moving way, the judge didn't have to say everything he said at the end, saying this is a tragedy. He could have just said, accepted, okay, sweep it under the rug, everybody shut up about it. But he said it's a tragedy on all sides. And he said maybe this can, right some of the wrongs. And it's that outside help that really did this. There are things that he said in that moment 10 years ago, August 19th to the day. So this is, whenever this comes out, August 19th is the 10-year anniversary of your release. So he is the person who's reading these motions now?
Well, we're still waiting to hear that. He could be the person that hears it just because he was the judge over the case. But I think there are 3 judges counting him who it could possibly be given to review it, him and 2 others. So there's a good chance that he will be the judge who presides over it just because he was over the case when we were finally released, who presided over the deal. But at the same time, it could still potentially go to 2 other people also, of which we know absolutely nothing about.
Who gets to decide? Who decides that?
I have no idea.
And how come Burnett everything was going on his desk before we voted him out? So how now there are 3 people who can, I just don't understand. I don't get it.
That's what I mean. For every law there is on the books, you can usually find at least 2 that contradict it. Nothing about the judicial system is meant to be easily understood.
Can I ask you, I want to ask you a couple questions about the documentary, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying I've been following your journey since I was a teenager, but another person whose journey I've been following since I was a teenager, I guess, then is Pam Hobbs.
Mm-hmm.
And to see the way that she is in West of Memphis versus the Paradise Lost documentaries is night and day. And I remember I also had not seen this movie in a long time. I've seen it many times, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. And I remember when we first see Pam Hobbs in West Memphis, I was like, are we allowed to like her? I really like her now, you know? And same with
John Mark Byers.
Mark Byers. Like him or not, I don't know. But like he's definitely, his journey has been a very bizarre and interesting one as well. How do you feel when you hear them talking about your innocence? And do you now, as opposed to before, and do you have any relationship with the families?
I don't really have any relationship right now. We did whenever I first got out, just because we were doing like a lot of press stuff for the documentary, The West of Memphis. And a lot of people wanted to talk to her. They wanted to talk to John Mark Byers. So a lot of times we would end up, all going to interviews together. There were times.
Oh my God.
Yeah. We would do interviews together. At night after it was all over, we would go to dinner together sometimes.
No. Oh my God.
One night we were at dinner and Pam Hobbs actually even gave me a gold pocket watch that the family had got together and bought and just wanted me to have as like a peace offering.
Damien Echols, you're going to make me sob.
Yeah.
So we did have a relationship for a while, but it's like just trying to get our lives together out here and move on, and things change. And
I mean, I'm sure I know the answer to this question, but like, do you forgive them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I really don't think most people understand what the justice system is like and how, manipulative it can be, so a lot of times if people tell you we have the person that committed this crime, most people are going to believe them. It's going to be your natural instinct. So how can you blame them for that?
I said that when we were doing our recordings, like trying to have some grace for the families early on, where it's like, I always say in our job is so weird because by the time we are talking about something, we have all the information because they're making the documentary about it, you know? And like along the way, the people in the documentary, sometimes we have no grace for them because we forget that they're just getting the information that the powers that be are giving them. You know?
Yeah. Plus, you have to keep in mind that they're not in their normal mind state. Whenever they're being told this, they are in a highly susceptible mind state on top of that, because they're going through, tremendous emotional and mental and spiritual trauma. It's like they're going through something that, shakes them to the core of their being. So it's not like they're going to even be in enough shape or condition psychologically to like look at the puzzle pieces of the murder case of their kid and figure out if someone's telling them the truth or not.
Yeah. When you're watching Pam Hobbs like fall on the cement in the, wherever she was when she found out that her son was dead back in the day, like that is just so hard to watch,
Yeah.
I just think it says so much to her journey that she's that woman who really, the entire world fell out from under her. So much so, metaphorically and physically and literally, that she collapsed to the ground, her whole world shattered. And then here she is actually saying, I know in my heart that the men in prison didn't do this. Like that to really, it's so easy to sleep at night and feel better telling yourself that justice was served. So for her to go through that horrifying moment that we all saw, and to like Paradise Lost 1, 2, and 3 go through like they absolutely did it, to now be so willing to sit in front of Amy Berg and say they didn't do this. For John Mark Byers to be burning photos of you in the woods, Damien, and like
Lord.
Saying all this shit, to then like heckling people outside the courthouse about who really did it, and saying the words, I believed what the state told me. These people could have easily run away or said, no, I'm going to die on this hill. Absolutely not. I look crazy in Paradise Lost 2. Like that's that footage of me burning images of Damien, Jesse, and Jason lasts forever. He easily could have committed to that, but to change that so publicly is amazing.
Imagine the person who watches Paradise Lost 1 and 2 and then never watches another documentary about the case ever again,
Like, they think John Mark Byers did it, number one.
Well, keep in mind, that was true for me also. Like, at the time we were going to trial, the attorneys that I had at the time, they told me, yeah, we're pretty sure John Mark Byers did it. So the whole time, the first, 15 years that I'm in prison, I'm convinced that John Mark Byers is the person who carried out the murders that I'm sitting in prison waiting to die for. So
Yeah.
then, there was that whole weird element of it too, of coming to terms one day with, oh, I guess I was wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it also makes you realize, like with the families, it's like, I didn't understand what was good. Like I had to change what I thought. You just realize that's the nature of the situation.
Yeah. A lot of people always ask us, like, what's the best documentary to watch about this case? And I always say Paradise Lost walked so that West of Memphis could run. Essentially, we're here because of Paradise Lost, but it was happening in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So West of Memphis is the most cohesive, pulled back lens, but it's also happening in real time because it follows you home.
Mm-hmm.
So that I always say, like, I'm not taking anything away from Joe and Bruce and what they did with Paradise Lost. We wouldn't be here without it. But if you really want to not go, like, for lack of a much better term, on a wild goose chase following John Mark Byers or something else, like, watch West of Memphis and you'll get it all.
Yeah. And, that's one of the, I think, really Paradise Lost is a huge part of what saved our lives. If it wasn't for that documentary, they would have probably murdered me within the first handful of years that I was there. That documentary extended my life. It gave me time to actually work on the case. So I still see that as, I can't even describe how big a part of the reason that I'm breathing right now, even doing this interview or anything else in the world. But the thing with it, I guess, what you're talking about, the wild goose chase with John Mark Byers and stuff like that, it was very much also like a product of its time. It was being recorded in real time as things were unfolding. So I can see the value also in that it kind of preserves what everybody was thinking and what everybody was feeling and what the energy of the situation was like at that moment, even if it all did turn out to be a bunch of crazy drama later. At least it was still all preserved for people to, see what everybody's lives looked like at that time period when everybody was going through this.
West of Memphis, I'm going to ask you this question in the most plain way I can, and please just be like, we're not talking about that if that's the answer.
Okay.
The West of Memphis points to Terry Hobbs as a good suspect for this murder. I'm wondering if you agree with that assessment of the documentary.
That's one of those things that it's really hard to say, just because, number one, like I said a while ago, I'd already been pointed falsely in the direction of John Mark Byers. I mean, there are a lot of really weird, factors around Terry Hobbs, and a lot of it that was never even released to, the media or anything else. Like, we had hired private investigators to find out a lot of things that, came away looking kind of weird, but not enough that you could ever, use anything to pinpoint someone with, what do they call it in court? The certainty, the beyond a reasonable doubt sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I've always been wary of, saying this is the guy that I think did it, because honestly, I don't know.
Because you barely know anybody who's been falsely accused of this murder.
There you go.
You barely know anybody.
You can count them on one hand.
Yeah, there you go. But this is why it would have been so important to do that DNA testing, is because we could have once and for all said yay or nay. And, if he's not, then he's still kind of walking around with this shadow over him at the same time. So it seems like he would want it to be done too, I would guess.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Maybe if I talk enough shit about him, he'll sue me, and then we'll get him deposed again, and then I'll be the new Natalie Maines.
I was going to say, can I ask you a question that has nothing really to do with the case?
Mm-hmm.
What is Queen Natalie Maines really like?
She is absolutely amazing and completely normal, which is something I stopped looking for in celebrities a long time ago. It's like you usually know there's going to be something weird going on there, and not necessarily that it's always even their fault. It's like they're forced into these weird ass lives that they have to become weird to adapt and be able to keep living. So you end up with some strange people sometimes, but she is completely and absolutely normal. And she's one of those few people that you feel like if you have your back against the wall, or if you really need something, if you call her, she would do whatever she could to help you. She would do whatever she could to be there.
I mean, she's got great taste in lawyers. We watching the deposition of Terry Hobbs, but from those two lawyers who we never see, by the way. I wish we could have seen the lawyers' faces.
Yeah.
That is some of the most compelling. GP and I have done 800 documentaries. That has got to be some of the most compelling minutes of a documentary I have ever seen.
Can I finish? Wait, can I finish? Or also,
Yeah.
is that funny? Is that funny, Terry Hobbs?
But on the line of celebrity, something that I've always thought about you is that you came out of jail and you were instantly super famous. So what was that transition like? But coming off of death row just in general, and then all of a sudden you've talked about this a little bit about being on the road and your speaking engagements, but you must get recognized everywhere you go.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me anymore. I think in the beginning, I don't think that world is a good thing. It's not, it's not a good place, at least for me, from my own perspective. Just the way it all operates and how people are almost beating themselves to death on this grind. You've always got to do the next thing, and you're only as relevant as, your last thing and all this kind of stuff. I think the person who described it, who summed it up best, is one time Dave Navarro said that he stopped doing interviews with certain forms of media just because it was the only thing they wanted to do was read a Wikipedia article about you and then ask you a question designed to get you to say the same thing that they just read. So he's like, why are you wasting both of our times? So, there's a lot of that sort of weird stuff in that world that people don't think about. When people think about the world of celebrity, they think it's you're driving around in a limousine with a chandelier hanging from the roof or something. They don't realize what it looks like behind the scenes. And I just realized that I do not enjoy that life. I don't want that life. To me, it's fucking terrible, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that in the beginning. And in the beginning, just due to stuff like having to promote the documentary, you find yourself getting pulled into all these different worlds that you don't understand. It's I'm fresh out of prison and I'm at Sundance as a producer on a documentary. And it's it wasn't good for me at all.
Yeah.
I realized that that's just not a world that I have any interest in. It doesn't, I think as a society, we kind of get that world dangled before us like a carrot on a stick. This is what you want to be. This is where you want to be. Even if it's only, Facebook famous, even if it's not movie star famous, whatever it is, it's we chase that thinking it's going to give us something that we don't already have. And I think that there are some people, I think we're all here to create in some way. And different people are going to be comfortable using different mediums in creating. Some people are going to be at the top of their game and happy as hell as a farmer, where they're actually growing stuff with their hands. For other people, I think they are going to be, that's their will, being a movie star. That's their will, being a TV star. That's their will, being a singer. They do it, and it's like they were custom made to fit into that life and be able to thrive and grow in it. And all good for them. If that's your thing, do it. But for me, I just realized it gave me an introduction to that world a little bit. And I realized this isn't a thing that's for me.
Yeah. I think a little bit too, because I remember I would play the role of, so sorry, but Damien has to go now, because everything is so beautifully personal to you, Damien. So when people are so connected and want to tell you their life story, you listen and you take that energy on, and it's exhausting, but you feel bad because they came to your show, they came to your class. And so you don't want to be rude, they're pouring their heart out to you. But I remember we would teach a whole tarot class, or we would teach a whole, you do energy work, which is exhausting for you anyway. And then everyone wants to stay and nicely, very nicely, take up another 45 minutes of your time with something that really means a lot to them. And so because you're so your heart is gigantic and you really do care and want to listen. Like there were times where I remember like Lori would give me the high sign and I'd of course nicely say like, the car's here or we got to go, or just get you, like pull you out of it so you can recharge in some kind of way.
Well, a lot of people, what they don't understand in situations like that, they think that they're going to bond with you by, it's like I did book signings where I would end up talking to like 850 people a night sometimes. So
wow,
even if it's only 200 out of 850, that they have this idea that they want to bond with you by telling you whatever traumatic thing happened to them. So there's actually a term for it. They call it trauma dumping. It's like whenever, and keep in mind, I was fresh out of prison. I'm in the process of having a nervous breakdown from all the sensory stimulation and being introduced to this new world and everything else. And then you're dealing with the trauma dumping on top of that, like night after night, where it's like, not only are you dealing with your own trauma, but you're having this other energy that people are kind of heaping on you. Sometimes you're trying to deal with that as well. And it can be absolutely crushing to be under the weight of it at times.
Yeah. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah.
I think, honestly,
what is your life
now? The only thing I would add now, though, is I would say over the past couple of years, and this is one of the reasons that I've been a little bit hesitant about even doing interviews or anything about the case anymore, stuff like that. It's because I've finally gotten to a place in my life where it's kind of like that is not the thing that most people who recognize me on the street or who come up to me to talk to me, that almost completely died away, a few years ago. Now, for the most part, it's all people who are interested in, the stuff that I teach now, the books that I write now, the classes that I'm doing now. So, there was a transition point where it became to be more about the stuff that was meaningful to me and the stuff that fueled my soul to be able to talk about and share with people and stuff like that. So it really did make me kind of wary of even, like opening this Pandora's box, like with the lawsuit and everything else about this case, because everybody's going to want to talk about it again. And it kind of takes the shift off of your life's work and brings it back to something else that wasn't always fun to wade through.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is your life now? What do you do all day? Like what sort of motivates you? What are your passions?
Well, I mean, pretty much what saved my life while I was in prison, which is Western Hermeticism, ceremonial magic. By the time I got out of prison, I was doing these practices for up to 8 hours a day. And these were things that I got far, far more effect and benefit out of than even, Eastern traditions like Zen. I received ordination in the Rinzai Zen tradition of Japanese Buddhism while I was in prison. I had a Zen teacher that would come from a 300-year-old temple in Japan back and forth to death row.
Wow.
To teach me. But even under that amount of guidance and with, all of that, I still feel like I have experienced far more change, positive change in myself and in my world due to the Western practices. So that's what it is that I share with people most of the time. And I usually do that. I found somebody told me, I am horrendous when it comes to technology of any sort, but somebody came to me one day and said, have you ever heard of Patreon? And this was about like maybe 4 years ago. And I had never heard of it at the time. And they're like, well, you should really do this. You should get on here because it gives you a platform to talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about, what's important to you. And if people find it interesting, then it provides a source of income at the same time. That ended up being a way to connect with a community that actually was excited and passionate about the same things that I was. So it gave me a whole new lease on life, a whole new direction to be able to go in. It went out from there and I started, traveling around and doing classes at, different retreat centers, stuff like that. And it ended up with the things that I love, the things that I am passionate about, absolutely consumed my life. So pretty much all of my life now is ceremonial magic in one way or another, whether it's doing, live stream classes on Patreon, or whether it's doing, talking to people that I tutor one-on-one, whatever it is. It's like that pretty much consumed my whole life. And that's what it is that I do. I have a third book on the subject, this one co-written with Lori, coming out in spring of next year. And it will be called Rituals, an Essential Grimoire. And it's basically about turning every aspect of your life into a ritual that forces you to pay attention to it and kind of funnel divine energy into it, so that you're not just, going through one day after the other and everything passing by you, and you're not really experiencing life until you get to the very end and realize, oh, it's over.
So let me ask you, what do we do in terms of getting things done? Because I've been making phone calls to people and they just give me the runaround. So I would love to know because what I do is I call and I'm like, hey, whether it's the governor, whether it's the West Memphis Police Department, I'm just like, asking for information that they should have already given us. So I just call as if I have every right to, which I guess I do. But I'm just like, hi, I'm just following up on that motion that was submitted. And Dave, it's so funny how they're like, say that name again. It's Echols, you said? And I'm like, are you telling me you don't? Like, oh my God, it's maddening.
Yeah, I saw you got blocked by the governor already.
Good work, GP.
Well, I do what I can. But so when I call up and they're like, wait, what? And they put you on hold, like, people are sitting here, right? And they are getting riled up, which is exactly what we want. So what do they do with that? Like, what do we ask for when we call, other than just like, we're just following up? Like, what do we say?
This is something that I am not 100% certain on, because I have never been over this aspect. I mean, like, whenever all this stuff was going on when I was in prison, there were people out here that were pretty much acting like generals of an army. They would tell people, write postcards and get them to here, or we're going to have a protest on the steps of the Capitol this week, be here at this time. And there were all these kind of masterminds behind it, getting things done. I am the wrong person to ask. But my job basically is to be where they tell me, when they tell me to be there. I think you have had good ideas in the past, the stuff you were put out of the people you were saying right to, or you were given the addresses, you were given the phone numbers, because the thing about that is they have to keep records of that stuff. Like, if you write a letter to whoever it is, to the governor, to the prosecutor, to the attorney general, that has to go into a file. So you're creating, this record that lets them see that people are paying attention to it. Same way if you make a phone call about it. Someone has to document the fact that happened. So you're contributing to them having to make a paper trail and seeing, that people haven't forgotten about this. So I would say write to the addresses that you are already posting. And I keep saying right. I keep, kind of forgetting that we live in a digital world now where people could also probably do this stuff on, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that as well. But I am pretty much the absolute last person in the world that can tell you what those things are. Okay, well, I will lead this charge. We ride at midnight. We're making phone calls. We're tweeting. We're not being dicks about it. We're calling and saying, "Hey, I haven't heard anything about that motion that was filed, and I'm just curious if the state is going to respond in any way. Thank you." And then that's been my. I mean, it got me blocked by the governor, but that's sort of my thing. And it's always. I think you could also say, if you wanted to, just something like you are in support of this DNA testing being done, so that we can finally see. People throw around the word justice, and I don't think there's any such thing as justice in this situation. Nothing they do is going to bring any of those kids back. Nothing they do is going to give 20 years of my life back. Nothing they do is going to fix all the trauma that this situation has created for pretty much everybody involved with it, which is what justice means, to even it out, to make it balanced. I don't think that's possible, but I do think it's possible that we can finally, everyone involved can have a sense of closure. And that's kind of what we're working towards right now, is tell them you would like to have a sense of closure out of it.
And you believe, I guess I'm asking, do you believe that this case is solvable and that we can, sooner than later know what happened?
I think if you're talking about just do I think it could potentially be solved just through things like testing and stuff like that? Yes. But, as for whether they're going to fight it or go through with it or, this would not be the first case that they had deliberately destroyed physical evidence in. When I was on death row, there was another guy there on death row that ended up getting off because the West Memphis Police Department destroyed evidence in his case. At the time that I was arrested, the entire West Memphis Police Department was under investigation by the FBI. So, this is
wow.
Yeah, this is a really shady place that's not, used to having a bunch of attention directed to them. So when you add in all of those things, is it possible that they could destroy evidence? Yes, which would prevent us from ever having a sense of closure. I really do think it's just kind of a wait and see situation. It's hard to say just because there's so many factors and variables in motion. And it's like my grandmother would say when I was a kid, man proposes, God disposes. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Just my last question is, are you still in touch with Jason and Jesse? Are you guys what's that relationship like?
Not really. The last time I saw them, I think let me think. I think one night whenever we went to dinner with Pam Hobbs and her family and John Mark Byers and his family, I think Jason and Jesse were both there also. So, and that would have been within the first 2 years that I was out. The time is very strange for me out here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But we just kind of, Jesse still lives in the same trailer park he did in West Memphis whenever we got out of prison. He takes care of, I think up until very recently, he was taking care of his dad who had Alzheimer's. And from what I had heard, his dad had actually even called the cops a couple of times and said, there's somebody in my house. And the cops would have to show up and explain to him, no, that's your son.
Oh, God.
I think he died recently. I'm not 100% positive. I don't know. So I don't know what Jesse Miskelly is floating around out there doing. Jason, the last I had heard, this was, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago. He lived in Seattle for a long time. Almost the whole time we had been out, he lived in Seattle. And I think a couple of years ago, he moved down to Texas and lives in Austin, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Well, I mean, those are all the questions I have. It is for me such a deep honor to meet you. And, thank you for spending this time with us and answering these questions. Revisiting that documentary was wild. I hadn't seen it. I saw it once at a screening that you were at and you did a talk afterwards. And I'd seen it again since then. But it is, I cannot believe what you have lived through. What an amazing human being you must be.
Thank you.
He's okay. He's fine. Didn't you miss this, Damien? This banter?
Yep. I always say she's the little sister I never wanted.
That's right.
Oh.
Well, I love you so much. Thank you for doing this, for wanting to do this, and I just, I'm here for you always, so anything.
Of course, and it's actually fun. I would not be entirely opposed to doing this again at some point.
Look, there are updates happening. Again, leading the charge. We ride at midnight. Let's see what happens. There are more things going on. I'm happy to be this mouthpiece.
You guys, thank you so much for hearing our episode with Damien Echols. I want to reiterate, Damien has a Patreon. What does he do on the Patreon?
He does just check it out. There's a whole ton of stuff there. Check it out. It's patreon.com/Damien Echols.
I was looking it up. It's there's art and there's writing workshops and there's all kinds of stuff you can do, just to interact with Damien. So I think that's very cool. We love the Patreon.
Yeah, he does tarot readings and stuff. He's very accessible there. It's very, very cool. And also, I had all my notes prepared, but I realized there are a lot of updates of things that we talked about in his case, but it's changing every day. So just follow Damien on Twitter. Follow me if you want for more just rage about the case. But I can't update you to the moment because by the time you hear it, it'll be out of date. So just keep following along with all of us, and we'll keep you posted. When we know, you'll know. How about that?
Thanks for checking this out, you guys. Go listen to our 2 parts on West of Memphis if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next week.
Yeah. I mean, come on, little sister he never wanted. Thanks. I love it. Best compliment. Best compliment I could ask for.
You guys are adorable.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.